This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Demonstrators in Hong Kong start fire on roads and subway station exit. Libyan pro-government forces clash with pro-Haftar forces in southern Tripoli. And the remains of late former Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe are expected back home this week. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Italian doctor fights to bring the identity of dead migrants to light. And we see a unique market trend in Nigeria where dogs are exchanged for palm oil. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. We begin in Hong Kong, where authorities say some protesters ignited fires on public roads. Facilities at the city's central station were vandalized, and a fire started at one of the exits, forced operations to shut down for the day. Firefighters rushed to the scene to put out the flames. Some protesters also built barricades on the streets in Hong Kong's Central and Admiralty areas. This comes as demonstrations continue to rock the city for a third month. Hong Kong protester Joshua Wong Chi-fung was detained again by police officers at Hong Kong's International Airport on Sunday morning. Wong was earlier arrested on the 30th of August and released on bail after appearing in court in Hong Kong. He then traveled to Taiwan, meeting with local politicians there, which police say may be a breach of his bail conditions. The 22-year-old is facing 3 charges relating to the city's ongoing protest. Since early on in the demonstrations, protesters have made 5 demands of the Hong Kong government. Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam affirms that she has responded to most demands. Still, the crisis is not yet over as yet. CGTN's Yu Wang explains.
First, the government will formally withdraw the bill in order to fully allay public concerns.
The fugitive bill is no longer there, as Carrie Lam has announced the formal withdrawal of the controversial legislation. The decision may help ease, but now to end months of unrest in the Asian financial hub, because there's something else the protesters want. In their 5 demands to the government, the demonstrators also ask the government to retract the use of the term riots to describe the recent, sometimes violent protests. Riot is a legal term. The law is clear on what constitutes a riot. That definition was not invented by the SAR government, but carried over from British common law. Then comes the demand to exonerate protesters who are charged.
Fourth, on dropping charges against protesters and rioters and shelving prosecutions. I have explained that this is contrary to the rule of law and is not acceptable. It also goes against the basic law, which states that criminal prosecutions must be handled by the Department of Justice, free from any interference.
So that raises questions over how the government could order law enforcement agencies to free and not prosecute those arrested without going through the due process of law. Article 63 of the Basic Law stipulates that criminal prosecutions should be free from any interference. And Article 25 says all residents are equal before the law. Article 14 defines all people as equal before the courts. If it's a question of infringing the law, there's no way that anyone can say they're more equal than others. As to the call for an independent inquiry into police behavior, the Independent Police Complaints Council has announced that it would carry out a probe into the event relating to the protests and clashes. The last demand is universal suffrage, and here again, a Chinese government spokesperson on Hong Kong has made clear the position.
大家都知道，2007年12月29号。
As we all know, on December the 29th, 2007, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress decided that the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region could be elected by universal suffrage in 2017. On August the 31st, 2014, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress made a decision on the framework and core elements of the general election of the chief executive.
Yu Yang, CGTN.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has suffered a new blow after a cabinet minister resigned, saying she did not believe Johnson was sincere about getting a Brexit deal with the European Union. Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd said she was resigning because she no longer believed leaving with a deal is the government's main objective. Rudd also slammed Johnson's expulsion of conservative lawmakers who oppose his Brexit plans, calling it an assault on decency and democracy. The UK Finance Minister also says Johnson is sticking to his Brexit plan and will not seek a delay to Britain's departure from the EU.
The Prime Minister will go to the Council meeting on the 17th and 18th. He'll be trying to strike a deal. He absolutely will not be asking for an extension in that meeting. Should we, as the bill talks about the 19th being an important date,
yes,
and at that point we will consider our options, but our policy is clear, it is unchanged. We will be leaving on October the 31st.
Libyan pro-government forces have once again clashed with pro-Haftar forces. The latest confrontation took place in Ain Zara, an outer neighborhood of the capital Tripoli. The fighting is said to have been a counter-offensive by forces loyal to Tripoli's UN-backed government of national accord. The latest attacks follow weeks of relative calm and have reportedly left at least 3 GNA troops dead. Haftar's Libyan National Army swept out of the east in April in a bid to take over the capital, but has been met with resistance from forces loyal to the government of national accord that has vowed to defend its base in Tripoli.
Today, thanks be to God, we have progressed. We have reached the Alawi crossroads after the post-dividers. The troops' morale is high.
Well, former Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe is expected to be buried next weekend after his body is returned from Singapore, where he died 2 days ago. Presidential spokesman George Charamba says Mugabe's body should arrive in Zimbabwe on Wednesday, with an official funeral on Saturday and the burial the following day. The location of his burial, however, remains unclear, with Mugabe's family and President Emerson Mnangagwa's government apparently at odds over whether it would be at his homestead northwest of Harare or at a shrine for liberation heroes in the capital. In the church where Mugabe used to worship, people prayed on Sunday for him to be forgiven following his death.
He still had his faith, even after the frustrations of what happened. You know, the way he was removed from power. Yes, he was a disappointed man. He was frustrated. He was angry. But at the same time, I think he was able to express his faith.
But he did occasionally attend our 10 o'clock mass, the service we've just had, yes, with his family. And he used to sit right in front. Yes, he liked to be where he could see it all, experience it all clearly. Yes, and I pray that God may have mercy on his soul. May he rest in peace.
We are saddened by his death because we are fellow citizens of this country, and him being a Catholic, he used to attend Mass here, and being a leader, we thank God for the time that we had with him.
And to Italy, where one doctor is trying to raise awareness about the thousands of migrants that have lost their lives at sea. According to Cristina Cantaneo, a forensic pathologist, these migrants deserve the same recognition as any other disaster victims, which is a concerted effort to find out who they were. Susan Wangeli reports.
Cristina Cantaneo is on a mission to shed light on Mediterranean's migrant dead. She believes that all of them deserve the same respect as any other disaster victims. Their families too need to know the painful truth about their fate.
if the same dignity were given to these dead and the same rights to their families as is done for Europeans in air crashes or Americans, etc., we should be able to identify these individuals quickly and easily and give this information back to their families. But this is not being done now.
Since 2013, the laboratory she heads at the University of Milan has been waging a lonely fight to piece together a lie from the photos or love letters, school reports and bits of clothing carried by migrants who have drowned trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe.
For me, one of those impacting things was a small pouch of soil that many of the Eritreans, but also many of the sub-Saharans had tied in their t-shirts or in their clothing or in little small satchels of plastic in their pockets. And immediately at the first autopsy, I was worried that this could be, hashish or drugs or something, because it felt like that from the outside. And the policeman who was working behind me taking photographs said, no, don't worry, this is nothing. And he taught me, he explained to me what this was. And we were to see this a series of times, and this is the soil that they tie in their t-shirt because it's the soil of their homeland.
The catalyst for Catineo's mission was a series of deadly shipwrecks starting in 2013. This includes the capsizing of a boat off the island of Lampedusa in October of that year that killed more than 360 people, mostly Eritreans. 18 months later, the Barker vessel, carrying at least 800 people, foundered after it collided with a Portuguese cargo ship that had raced to its rescue.
When we identified the first two of the Barcone at the beginning of the year, it was such a relief. I mean, it was such a relief to write a certificate with those names on them. And it was a bit like giving back something that had been taken away. I'm talking about dignity and human rights to the family.
Over 300 families have come forward hoping to learn if their relatives were on the Barker, often with the assistance of the International Red Cross offices across Africa. So far, her team's painstaking work has secured funding only from a handful of universities and religious foundations, as well as a banking foundation. Cataneo says although their work is on someone who is dead, it has done some good and has a purpose. And that's all she and her team needs to keep going. Susan Mongeli, CGTN.
Well, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be right here with us on Africa Live. We appreciate that. We've got more news coming your way after the break. Let's take a look at the headlines. Government increases funding by up to 5.2% in efforts to eradicate illiteracy in Somalia.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Access to education in Somalia remains a challenging subject following years of instability and the absence of a government to enforce curriculum in schools. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo reports from Mogadishu on the state of education in the Horn of the African nation.
Less than 30% of school-age children in Somalia have access to education. The government says the problem exists in both rural and urban areas, with access to education in rural areas more limited. In nomadic families, school-age children are forced to look after their parents' livestock and move from region to region in case of natural calamities such as drought.
Less than 30% of school-going age children have access to education. The remaining 70% are unable to attend learning institutions. The Ministry of Education now plans to ensure this number increases. We don't want militant groups to exploit and use these children because they lack basic education.
Research by Iftin Foundation, a local think tank, indicates that 50,000 students graduated from high school last year, a small percentage compared to the country's young population. Authorities blame this on the lack of financial support, mainly from the central government, with the education sector being one of the least funded in the overall national budget.
Education receives a small percentage of the overall budget. Before, it was less than 1%, despite being a critical sector that impacts all aspects of life. We have now increased that number from 2.5 to 5.2, based on the government's capacity in the past 2 years.
Literacy rates in the country remain very low according to survey. The total literacy rate is estimated to be around 37.8%. Men have a literacy rate of 49.7%, while only 25.8% of females are literate, highlighting the true educational gender inequality in the Horn of African nation. However, researchers noted a growing number of recent graduates among universities. Male students contributed to over 65%, while female graduates contributed to 35%.
Our research indicates that close to 15,000 students graduated from top universities across the country. We featured 54 universities in our research. Our findings didn't include universities that held graduation ceremonies in 2019. But it's evident that this number will increase in the coming years as more institutions of higher learning are propping up.
As part of a wide initiative backed by donors, Mogadishu hopes to improve education delivery, especially in rural areas. To achieve this, it plans to hire more teachers, create a database for students, as well as streamline and enforce the educational curriculum in all state and private institutions. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
To Nigeria now, where some states and communities still practice the age-long trade by barter system of exchange. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports on a unique, strange marketplace in central Nigeria's Plateau State where thousands of dogs are exchanged for palm oil.
It's the main market day in Dawanki in Nigeria's north-central state of Plateau. It's been bustling since 4 a.m. What goes on here is a unique kind of trade and products too. It's the ancient trade by barter. Here, traders exchange lorry loads of palm oil known as red gold for thousands of live dogs. The oil comes from Akwa Ibom State in southern Nigeria. Mark Molua has been trading here for over 40 years.
Then later on they discovered that maybe oil, they have plenty oil in their place. Then instead of, they know that here we don't have oil, then they decided to, they bring oil in exchange of dogs. That's how it started.
It turned out a lucrative business for traders here. Although money isn't exchanged, but the goods are taken back home where they're eventually sold for money. Especially the dogs, which make for a delightful delicacy for the southern people.
When we transact this horse here to our place, we sell this horse to kill and chop for meat. The dog meat is the best meat, let me say so. Dog, you south, even though you carry up to 4, 5, 911, you sell finish because our people like it.
Depending on the sizes, 7 dogs could be exchanged for about 10 gallons of palm oil. But the barter ends here. Traders then take their products to the local markets where they sell for money. At the end, the weekly trade generates millions of naira. It's a system that could outlive this generation. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Plateau, Nigeria.
Well, dogs aren't exactly man's best friend in that region. Moving on, meanwhile, it was a food adventure in the Ugandan capital, Kampala, as several street food meals were put on display at the first Kampala Foodie Street Carnival. And with over 1,000 festival goers in attendance, the food feast was a delightful experience for many. Leon Sienga reports. Let's take a look.
A day of fun with a focus on food. This is Kampala's foodie street carnival. Lined up opposite Uganda's parliament are some of the finest street food vendors in the country. The aroma here distinctively inviting. Thomas Nkubi was offering visitors juicy barbecued steak.
I'm serving people who enjoy it. At the same time, I'm earning out of it.
Organizers of the festival say the event is adding something new to Uganda's food culture.
The richness of the food we have in Uganda, anything almost is street food. It's a quick fix, pick it up and go. And this happens all over the country. Any district you go to, you will find food on the street.
There's been plenty here to choose from. The burgers, the deep fried fish, and even the barbecued chicken. But this festival wouldn't be complete without Uganda's favorite street food. This is the Rolex. It's made of eggs and leavened flat bread and often raw tomatoes to add flavor.
Rolex is like the legit everyone's go-to when you're drunk, when you're broke. It's 1,000, so come on.
The burgers served at the Krusty Krab food truck were also an attraction.
Ugandans love our kind of food because it's very fast, it doesn't take time, and the way you can see it's a food truck, you pick your food and just go.
This was also a day to introduce children to street food culture. After all, it was about enjoying the experience. And when all the eating was done, there was an easy way to work it all off. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. We'll see you on the other side of the break with your sports news. Let's take a look at the headlines. South Africa forward Richard Nta is out to make his presence felt at the Rugby World Cup in Japan, where the Springboks are eyeing a third Webb Ellis Trophy.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's talk a bit of rugby. We start off with the Rugby World Cup, where South African forward Richard Nta is out to make his presence felt at the World Cup in Japan, where the Springboks are eyeing a third Webb Ellis Trophy. Nta, who will be playing in his second tournament, is determined to power his team at scrum.